January 1942. Dawn approaches in the western Pacific. Low clouds press against a gray horizon. Salt hangs in the air, thick and metallic. The sea rolls steadily, unhurried, as if unaware that it has been chosen as a battlefield. Along the shoreline, Japanese officers study the water through binoculars, confident in the defenses they have prepared: reefs, surf, artillery, and distance. The ocean itself, they believe, will finish what their guns begin. This moment matters because it sits at the heart of Japan's strategic faith in natural barriers. Imperial planners had built their early war doctrine around the idea that island chains, coral reefs, and narrow approaches would bleed any attacker dry before troops ever reached land. Amphibious assault, in their calculations, was a fragile operation. Boats splintering on reefs, men drowning under equipment, formations dissolving into chaos. Western armies, they believed, lacked the endurance and discipline to sustain repeated landings against prepared defenses. What Japanese officers expected that morning was delay, confusion, and collapse. Small craft breaking apart in the surf. Engines choking on salt water. Infantry pinned offshore, unable to advance or retreat. What they experienced instead unsettled them deeply. From beyond the horizon came a sound, low at first, then multiplying. Not explosions, engines, hundreds of them. A steady mechanical growl rolling across the water, unbroken by waves or distance. American landing craft moved forward in deliberate lines, their hulls riding low, their wakes tight and controlled. They struck reefs, scraped coral, absorbed impacts that should have shattered lighter boats, and kept moving. These were not fragile vessels. They were purpose-built machines. The U.S. Navy's landing craft, particularly the Higgins LCVP, represented a quiet industrial revolution. Designed with a shallow draft, reinforced plywood sides, and a steel bow ramp, they could run directly onto beaches or reefs, unload men and equipment in seconds, then reverse away under fire. Official Navy evaluations noted their ability to withstand small arms fire, shrapnel, and repeated grounding without catastrophic failure. Wartime production records show that by 1943, American factories were delivering thousands of these craft at a pace Japan could neither match nor disrupt. Days after action reports from early Pacific engagements began to reflect confusion. Defensive assumptions were no longer holding. Boats that should have broken apart were returning for second and third waves. Craft that took hits continued forward, ramps dropping with mechanical reliability. The expected sound of cracking hulls was replaced by the constant engine hum. Unchanged, persistent, almost indifferent, that sound became the symbol of the campaign. Engines turning without pause. A rhythm that did not panic or accelerate, but maintained speed and direction. To Japanese officers trained to read hesitation as weakness, the steadiness itself was alarming. At Guadalcanal, at New Guinea, and later at Tarawa, the pattern repeated. Japanese defenders had carefully plotted kill zones based on estimated landing distances and assumed failure points. Yet American craft crossed reefs once thought impassable. At Tarawa in November 1943, coral formations extended hundreds of yards from shore. Japanese planners expected boats to stall far out, forcing infantry to wade under fire. Many did, but many others did not. Landing craft grounded, scraped forward, and delivered Marines far closer to shore than calculations predicted. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki had famously expressed confidence that Tarawa could not be taken by force alone. That confidence eroded rapidly as the landings unfolded. Despite heavy losses, the assault did not collapse. It continued, wave after wave, driven by boats that refused to fail as expected. American naval records describe landing craft returning with hulls riddled by bullets, ramps scarred by shrapnel, engines overheated and leaking oil. Yet still operational, maintenance crews patched them quickly, sent them back out, and repeated the cycle. The system was not elegant. It was relentless. For Japanese observers, this durability suggested something larger than engineering. It implied an economy capable of absorbing loss without slowing, a doctrine that assumed damage, planned for it, and moved forward regardless. Where Japanese naval culture prized perfection and decisive engagement, the American approach revealed tolerance for imperfection, compensated by volume and persistence. Where Japanese naval culture prized perfection and decisive engagement, the American approach revealed tolerance for imperfection, compensated by volume and persistence. The recurring symbol, the engine sound, carried this meaning. It was not heroic or dramatic, it did not roar. It simply continued, even under fire, even after impact, even when logic suggested withdrawal. Captured Japanese documents later analyzed by U.S. intelligence reveal growing concern over American industrial capacity. Reports noted that destroying individual craft had little effect on the overall tempo of landings. Replacement boats appeared faster than they could be neutralized. Ammunition expenditure increased without proportional results. Morale, once anchored in defensive certainty, began to fray. This experience altered perception. The war was no longer against a distant, resource-poor enemy reliant on improvisation. It was against a system, factories, logistics, standardized design, and a political culture that mobilized civilian industry into military endurance. The landing craft were not just transports. They were physical expressions of American democracy at war, mass-produced, replaceable, and designed to function even when damaged. As the Pacific Campaign progressed, Japanese defensive planning shifted. Greater emphasis was placed on depth, underground fortifications, and attritional strategies. The shoreline itself could no longer be trusted as a decisive barrier. The belief that the sea would protect the islands had been broken by plywood hulls, steel ramps, and engines that would not stop. By war's end, Allied assessments concluded that amphibious capability had been decisive. The landing craft, simple in appearance, unglamorous in role, had enabled a form of warfare that bypassed traditional naval engagements and struck directly at occupied ground. Japanese officers who survived carried with them the memory of that first shock. Boats that should not have survived, surviving anyway. In retrospect, the lesson extended beyond tactics. The durability of those craft reflected a broader truth about the conflict. Democracies did not rely on singular brilliance or perfect execution. They relied on systems that could fail partially and still function, on abundance that absorbed loss, on momentum that did not require constant victory to continue. The engine sound fades now into history, replaced by silence and surf, but its meaning remains. Freedom in that war was not only defended by courage, it was carried forward on hulls that scraped reefs, took damage, and kept going. Steady, persistent, and impossible to stop once set in motion.